welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
I'm incredibly thrilled you're joining us today.
Absolutely.
But before we even get into the thick of it, do me a massive favor and hit that like button.
Yeah, please do.
And subscribe to the show right now. It is genuinely the single best way to ensure we can keep bringing you these custom-tailored, hyper-focused deep dives. And trust me, you are not going to want to miss a single second of today's conversation.
No, you really aren't.
Yeah.
It is going to be a very intense mapping of some incredibly complex terrain, that's for sure.
Intense might actually be an understatement. Today, we are taking on a comprehensive review of a highly provocative, totally unapologetic new ebook that is just making massive waves online right now.
Huge waves.
It's called Marriage Treadmill. The subtitle is Women Marry, then get fat, depressed, lazy, and take their husband to the cleaners. It's written by Conrad Riker. Now listen to me closely here. Whether you ultimately agree with the premise or you strongly push back against it, if you are a man navigating modern relationships, trying to build and protect wealth, or just, seeking to understand the underlying mechanics of modern family law, this book is essential reading.
It really provides a crystal clear window into a rapidly growing movement.
Exactly. I highly urge you to check Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy the book right now. You really need to examine the source material for yourself.
Right.
And while you're at it, make sure to follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack for his ongoing writings and strategies.
But before we truly begin unpacking all of this, we need to set some very strict, very clear ground rules for today's discussion.
Yes, we do.
The text we are analyzing is highly politically charged. It is written specifically for a men's rights activist audience.
The MRA audience, yeah.
Right, the MRA audience. And it specifically targets men in the red-pilled manosphere. It heavily critiques modern institutions, mainstream feminism, and what the author explicitly describes as Marxist infiltrations into the traditional family structure.
Which is heavy stuff.
It is. So I want to make it absolutely unequivocally clear to you, the listener, that we as your hosts are never taking sides today.
Never.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints, the politics, or the ultimate conclusions of this content. Our mission is simply to impartially report on the ideas, the data, and the intricate arguments contained in the original source material.
That's our only job here.
We want to help you understand the history of our institutions, how they operated before the cultural shifts the author describes, and explore exactly why this specific book is resonating so fiercely with its target audience.
Exactly. We're acting as translators and analysts today. We're here to decode the arguments, not champion them. And the journey Riker takes the reader on is sprawling.
It covers a lot of ground.
We are going to unpack the legal, biological, and cultural traps that the author claims are fundamentally rigged against men. We'll look closely at the historical shift in family courts, the brutal, algorithm-driven realities of the modern sexual marketplace, and finally, we'll explore what the author calls the red pill rebellion.
The exact actionable strategies.
Right, the strategies men are employing right now to fight back and protect themselves. All right, so let's unpack this. We have to start where the text says the modern trap was first set, which requires a bit of a history lesson regarding the legal landscape.
Right, and to understand the author's perspective, we really have to look at the first chapter, which is bluntly titled, The Setup You Were Never Meant to Win.
Catchy title.
Yeah, Riker doesn't look at modern divorce rates as a modern phenomenon. He pinpoints a very specific, undeniable moment in history where he believed the architectural destruction of the traditional family was signed into law.
And that's 1969.
It's 1969. The book paints this vivid picture of a man named Robert Ehrlich standing before a California legislative committee. Ehrlich warns them. In no uncertain terms, he says, you are building a legal system that will destroy the family.
Wow.
And the author notes, rather grimly, that the committee actually laughed at him.
They laughed at him.
They did. But the very next year, in 1970, Governor Ronald Reagan officially signed California's no-fault divorce law into effect.
Wait, let me pause you there, because the book makes a massive deal out of this specific piece of legislation. According to Riker, this wasn't just some minor legal tweak or an administrative update.
Not at all.
He frames this as the exact moment marriage completely stopped being a binding covenant, like stopped being a real contract, and transformed into what he calls a financial ambush. How does the text justify that leap?
It's a crucial point, and what's fascinating here is how the author meticulously reframes the entire concept of no-fault divorce. If you look at the historical context, no-fault divorce was originally sold to the American public as a highly compassionate measure.
Right, to make things easier.
The narrative at the time was all about reducing conflict. Prior to 1969, to get a divorce, you had to prove fault. You had to go into a courtroom and legally demonstrate adultery, severe cruelty, abandonment, or something similarly egregious.
Which means it was messy.
It was messy, it was very public, and forced couples to drag each other through the mud just to legally separate. No fault was supposed to be the humane alternative.
But Riker argues it achieved the exact opposite of its intended compassion, right?
Precisely. Through the lens of this book, by removing the strict requirement of proving fault, the state effectively installed a legal guillotine over the head of the primary earner.
A legal guillotine.
Yes. He claims that one spouse, and the data he extensively cites, shows it is overwhelmingly the wife can unilaterally decide to terminate what is ostensibly a lifelong legal and financial contract without having to prove a single ounce of wrongdoing on the husband's part.
So there doesn't need to be abuse.
There doesn't need to be physical abuse, there doesn't need to be infidelity, there doesn't need to be abandonment. The required threshold is simply, I'm not happy anymore.
Just a feeling.
And with that single subjective phrase, the author argues, the state steps in to ensure the husband's life savings, the equity in his home, and a significant portion of his future earnings are systematically liquidated and redistributed.
He calls it a liability swap. It's such an aggressive term, but when you look at how he lays out the mechanics of it, you can see why the manosphere audience latches onto it.
Absolutely.
You think you're entering a balanced partnership, but Riker says you're actually just providing all the upfront capital and ongoing labor, while the other party holds total, unchecked veto power over the continuation of the enterprise.
It's entirely lopsided in his view.
Let's dive into the stats the book throws at us, because they paint a really brutal picture. He pulls from the National Center for Family and Marriage Research, pointing out that women initiate somewhere between 70% and 80% of all divorces.
And that initiation statistic is the foundational bedrock for his next argument, which is that the financial fallout for men is disproportionately, almost punitively, severe.
Right.
Riker points to a specific Urban Institute study indicating that men lose an average of 47% to 73% of their total net worth post-divorce.
That is insane, 73%.
Think about the gravity of those numbers for a second. Half to three-quarters of a lifetime of labor just wiped out.
Fun.
But perhaps the most visceral, emotionally resonant statistic in this section is regarding the family home. The book claims that 42% of divorced men lose their homes entirely, meaning they are forced to move out and find new shelter.
Compared to what for women?
Compared to just 18% of women.
How does the legal system justify that kind of disparity? I mean, losing up to 73% of your net worth. How is that legally justified under the guise of an equitable no-fault separation?
That is exactly the contradiction the author is trying to expose. He argues that the family courts inherently, almost subconsciously, operate on deeply traditional, outdated assumptions, even while enforcing modern progressive laws.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
The courts assume women are the default caretakers and men are the default providers. Therefore, when the marriage dissolves, the court essentially punishes the provider by stripping him of his assets and shelter in order to maintain the standard of living for the caretaker.
So they want it both ways.
Exactly. The book asserts that the state essentially forces the man to continue acting as a financial provider without receiving any of the benefits, companionship, family life, household support that the initial marriage contract implied.
It's a staggering premise, and Riker doesn't just rely on these high-level macro statistics. He brings in specific, deeply personal case studies that are clearly designed to hit the reader right in the gut.
He really humanizes the data.
He talks extensively about a guy named Kevin Hines. The narrative details here are intense. Kevin was married for 18 years. He completely busted his spine working manual labor construction jobs, driving long-haul trucks, specifically so his wife could have the privilege of staying home.
Right.
According to the text, she never worked a traditional job, never contributed to Social Security, never brought in outside income. But when the divorce finally came down, the court didn't look at Kevin's broken back or his years of solitary labor as an investment that belonged to him.
Not at all.
The court ordered Kevin to pay $8,400 a month in spousal support, completely liquidated his $1.2 million retirement fund that took him decades to build, and gave his ex-wife 60% of the equity in the home.
And the kicker there, the detail Riker highlights with absolute disgust, is that the presiding judge called this distribution equitable.
Equitable, that's rough.
The author uses Kevin's story not just as a tragedy, but as a blueprint to highlight what he calls the ultimate trap of the family court system. He breaks it down like this. As a man, you have two choices.
Okay.
You either fight the system to keep what you built, which means paying aggressive divorce attorneys $300 to $500 an hour until you're entirely bankrupt anyway.
More.
Or you simply surrender, sign the paperwork, and try to survive on the financial scraps the state allows you to keep. And what's really interesting is how Riker scales this exact argument all the way up to the billionaire class.
Oh, to prove that wealth doesn't protect you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He does this to prove a point that absolutely no amount of wealth, societal status, or legal firepower protects a man from this inherent structural bias. He specifically points to the Bill Gates divorce.
Oh man, yes. The Bill Gates section of the book is absolutely wild to read. Riker frames the dissolution of the Gates marriage not as a sad parting of ways, but as a state-sanctioned mugging with a press conference.
State-sanctioned mugging.
That specific phrasing is so loaded. He argues that Bill Gates spent 25 years methodically building Microsoft from a tiny garage operation into one of the most powerful global empires in human history.
And the text is very clear on who did the building.
Explicitly, it notes Melinda didn't code the operating software. She didn't secure the early enterprise contracts. But when she decided she was fundamentally done with the marriage, there was no massive public scandal, no proven betrayal, just a highly curated PR release. And she legally walked away with tens of billions of dollars.
And Riker's main point of contention isn't just the financial transfer itself, it's the societal reaction to that transfer.
How people talked about it.
Right. He points out that mainstream media and society at large universally celebrated her as brave, empowered, and liberated, while simultaneously framing Bill as cold, unfeeling, or somehow inherently at fault. Completely and utterly ignoring the indisputable fact that he generated the overwhelming majority of the wealth she was taking.
It's a fascinating cultural critique. If we connect this to the bigger picture for the listener, the author is asking a very pointed, very uncomfortable question. If a man with the practically infinite resources and legal teams of someone like Bill Gates is fundamentally exposed and taken to the cleaners, what possible hope does the average working class man like Kevin Hines have?
None, according to Riker.
And the book gets even darker, because this exposure isn't just financial. It extends deeply into biology and the legal definitions of paternity. Riker highlights a concept he coins the Gavin Grundy effect, pulling from a specific case in Texas.
Yes, that case study is structurally vital to his overall thesis.
That story is honestly enraging to read, regardless of your politics. According to the book, a man was legally ordered to pay $50,000 in retroactive child support for a child that a modern, highly accurate DNA test definitively proved was not biologically his.
Let that soon in for the listener.
The science proved he wasn't the father, but the state demanded he pay for the child anyway.
Exactly. And the legal rationale the court used is what Riker wants his audience to focus on. The court argued that because this man had acted as a father, because he had lived in the home, provided for the child emotionally and financially before discovering the truth, he was now permanently financially liable as the father.
Biology be damned.
Biology entirely be damned. Riker uses this specific precedent to argue a terrifying point for his readers. Once a man steps into the purview of the family court system, actual biology, objective logic, and traditional concepts of justice no longer apply.
The court doesn't care.
The text claims the family court fundamentally does not care about the truth of paternity. Its primary overriding function is to extract necessary resources from the male to subsidize the female and the state's welfare burdens.
So hearing all this, a lot of guys listening right now might be thinking, okay, the system is biased, I get it. I'll just be smart. I'll get an ironclad prenuptial agreement before I ever get married. Problem solved.
A lot of men think that.
But Riker literally laughs at that idea in the text. He dedicates a whole section to dismantling the myth of the prenup.
He considers prenups to be nothing more than a legal sugar pill.
The sugar pill.
They give men a false sense of security while offering almost zero actual protection when the marriage ends. The book details, with numerous citations, how family court judges routinely toss out perfectly drafted prenups if a woman simply claims she signed it under undue pressure, or that she had a lack of adequate counsel at the time.
And Riker says that's just an excuse.
He claims these phrases are often just legal code in the courtroom, for I didn't actually read it, or more likely I changed my mind and want more money.
He brings up some high-profile examples to prove this point, right?
He does. He points to Kevin Costner, who had an 18-year marriage and what was supposed to be a highly restrictive ironclad prenup. Yet, when the divorce hit the courts, The judge essentially ignored the strict limitations of the document, resulting in a massive multi-million-dollar payout that contradicted the original agreement.
Costner got taken too.
Yes. He also mentions Elon Musk's 2008 divorce. Musk had a prenup, but the judge simply struck it down from the bench, labeling the terms unconscionable, which is a legal term that essentially means the judge personally found it too unfair to enforce, regardless of the signatures on the page.
The speculation here, if you follow the author's logic to its ultimate conclusion, is truly terrifying for anyone trying to build a legacy. If legally binding prenups drafted by top-tier lawyers are routinely tossed out by individual judges based on subjective feelings of fairness, how can a modern man legally protect his life's work?
Riker's bleak conclusion is that he simply can't.
The moment you stand at the altar and say, "I do," you are signing a blank check, a contract written in invisible ink that only reveals its true terms when your spouse eventually decides it's time to cash out.
And that profound sense of legal entrapment perfectly sets up the text's next major argument. Riker asserts that this financial and legal devastation in the courts is actually only half the battle.
Right, because why do you guys keep doing it?
Exactly. If the legal system is a trap, why do men keep willingly walking into it? The book posits that the laws were purposefully structured this way to cater to a very specific, incredibly ancient biological imperative.
Here's where the book takes a massive pivot
Yep.
and where the arguments get really interesting. We move from courtroom mechanics into evolutionary biology and what the author aggressively labels the lazy wife narrative.
It's a very controversial framing.
Riker doesn't just blame biased lawyers, feminist judges, or the state. He goes much deeper. He blames human evolution itself.
To truly grasp Riker's perspective in this section, we have to look closely at the evolutionary psychology theories he relies on to build his foundation. He heavily cites Robert Triver's parental investment theory, which dates back to 1972, as well as David Buss's well-known sexual strategies theory.
Which a lot of the manosphere guys already know.
Right, listeners familiar with evolutionary biology or general manosphere concepts are probably well acquainted with these ideas, but what's fascinating is how the author applies them to modern marital decline.
Okay, lay it out for us.
The core premise is that females of our species invest significantly more biological resources into offspring. 9 months of physically demanding gestation, subsequent lactation, and years of highly intensive, calorie-burning early child rearing.
The asymmetrical investment.
Exactly. Because of this massive asymmetrical biological investment, women evolve to be highly selective in their mating choices. They specifically seek out long-term mates who possess the ability to provide consistent resource security and physical protection for them and their highly vulnerable offspring.
Right, and the author is very careful to state that this isn't a moral failing on the part of women. He says that's not a flaw, it's just raw, unfeeling biology. It's how the species survived.
Yes.
But he argues that modern society and modern law have essentially weaponized that ancient survival instinct. He theorizes that once a woman successfully secures that resource provider through the legally binding contract of marriage, her underlying biological incentive shifts dramatically.
This brings us to what is undoubtedly one of the book's most provocative and controversial concepts, the lazy wife syndrome.
Yeah, this part is wild.
Riker argues that from a purely ancestral evolutionary standpoint, once a woman has successfully locked down a capable provider and secured a steady stream of resources for her current or future offspring, her core biological motivation to maintain the intense physical attraction and emotional effort required during the courtship phase plummets.
She got what she needed.
She has successfully achieved the evolutionary goal. The hunt is over. The resources are captured. He refers to this phenomenon as the resource security effect.
And he doesn't just present this as a neat philosophical theory, he backs this up with some incredibly aggressive data points. He pulls from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and data from the NEA survey.
The National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey.
Right. Now, for those who might not know, NEAS is a massive ongoing program of studies designed to assess the health and nutritional status of adults and children in the United States. So this is heavy institutional data he's wielding.
It's not just a blog post.
Right. Riker cites this data to claim that a staggering 62% of married women are classified as obese, compared to roughly 45% of single women. Furthermore, he points to a specific study published in the journal Evolution in Human Behavior, showing that a woman's overall physical activity drops by a massive 27% almost immediately post-marriage.
Riker uses this data to draw a sharp contrast with men. He claims that men, driven by the continuous evolutionary pressure to prove their worth as providers and protectors, often maintain or even increase their healthy routines, work hours, and physical output to keep providing that security.
So they work harder.
They do. He paints a highly controversial picture of modern marriage as a metabolic trap for women. His argument is that the internal biological drive for a woman to stay in peak physical shape naturally fades because the evolutionary audition is definitively over. The necessary resource is legally secured.
The way he illustrates this with anecdotes is what makes the book so readable, even if you find the premise offensive. He shares the story of a couple he calls Mike and Lisa from Ohio.
That was a tough read.
According to the book, before the marriage, Lisa was highly active, a CrossFit regular, always prioritizing her fitness and appearance. Almost immediately after the wedding, she canceled her gym membership, started ordering fast food constantly, and when Mike gently brought it up, she explicitly told him, "I'm not your girlfriend anymore, I'm your wife."
Wow.
Over the next few years, she gained 45 pounds, completely stopped being intimate with him, and essentially treated Mike like a combination of a live-in housekeeper and an ATM machine. When Mike, feeling completely bait and switched, eventually filed for divorce, the court didn't look at her behavior.
They never do.
The court awarded her significant alimony, legally categorizing her as a sacrificing spouse. Riker asks the reader, with heavy sarcasm, sacrificing what? Her waistline.
It is an incredibly harsh, unsparing critique of marital dynamics, but Riker attempts to ground it even further in hard hormonal biology, specifically regarding the post-childbirth period, which he identifies as the ultimate danger zone for a marriage.
Okay, the hormonal shift.
He highlights a comprehensive 2019 longitudinal study that tracked over 800 women before, during, and after delivery. The study found that within 6 months of giving birth, a woman's natural testosterone levels drop by an average of 30%, while her levels of cortisol, which is the primary stress hormone, skyrocket.
Riker spends a lot of time explaining the actual mechanics of this hormonal shift. He explains that this specific chemical cocktail biologically rewires a woman's brain.
Right.
It makes her significantly less energetic, drastically less interested in sexual intimacy, vastly more emotionally reactive to minor stressors, and overall less motivated to maintain the energetic effort required to sustain a romantic relationship. In evolutionary terms, she forcefully shifts from mating mode directly into pure survival and protection mode for the infant.
What's crucial to understand about Riker's overarching argument here is how modern society, the medical establishment, and the psychological profession choose to interpret this very real biological shift.
Because they don't blame biology.
No, they don't. He argues that instead of openly acknowledging this as a completely natural, transient, evolutionary mechanism that couples simply need to weather, society actively pathologizes it. When a new mother feels a sudden loss of romantic interest in her husband or feels constantly overwhelmed and irritable, she's consistently told by mainstream therapists, daytime talk shows, and online articles that she is deeply unfulfilled.
She's told it's the husband's fault.
Exactly. She's told that her husband must be emotionally unavailable or that she is suffering from a clinical depression directly caused by the oppressive environment of her marriage.
Which leads directly into his explanation for the absolute explosion in SSRI usage among women. For context, SSRIs are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, the most common class of antidepressants, drugs like Lexapro or Zoloft.
Right.
Riker cites recent CDC data showing that a staggering 19% of American women have recently used antidepressants. He argues, quite controversially, that for the vast majority of these women, this is not genuine chemical clinical depression. Rather, he calls these pills a moral anesthetic.
Yes, that phrase, moral anesthetic, is absolutely central to his thesis. He claims that many women are essentially self-medicating to numb the intense cognitive dissonance and underlying guilt of systematically destroying their families through unnecessary divorce.
Because they know they're breaking the contract.
Right. He points out a specific data point, that antidepressant use among married women jumps an incredible 78% post-childbirth. In his view, they break the marital contract because their biology is signaling that the necessary resource is secured, the hormonal drive for the mate has vanished, and they are simply bored.
But they need a narrative.
But society provides them with a convenient narrative. It tells them that their feelings of emptiness must somehow be the man's fault. So they leave the marriage, take the assets through the family courts, and take the pills to numb any lingering guilt over the devastation they left behind.
He points to a very specific viral cultural phenomenon to illustrate this lack of guilt. The TikTok trend of the divorce glow-up. He specifically mentions a woman named Jessica Lutz. Her video got over 14 million views.
14 million.
It showed her showing off her brand new blonde hair extensions, wearing expensive designer dresses, drinking cocktails on a pristine beach in Bali. The text overlay on her video read, "Took 3.2 million and my freedom. Best decision ever."
For Riker, Jessica Lutz is the ultimate terrifying avatar of the modern system. She's the prime example of raw, unadulterated plunder disguised as feminist liberation.
Plunder.
According to his analysis of the case, she invested absolutely zero financial capital into the creation of that 3.2 million during the marriage, yet she legally walked away a multimillionaire, and the entire internet algorithmically cheered her bravery.
And where's the husband in all this?
Meanwhile, the husband, the one who actually generated the wealth, is left working night shifts to rebuild, paying 70% of his new take-home pay in ongoing child support, and is legally restricted from seeing his own kids more than 4 days a month.
Think about this profound double standard Riker is pointing out to you, the listener. It's the crux of his biological argument. Why is a husband heavily punished, both socially ostracized and legally decimated, for having a negative reaction to his wife's biological and emotional withdrawal, while the wife is actively financially rewarded by the family courts for simply claiming she is unfulfilled?
It's a glaring hypocrisy.
If a man leaves his family because he's bored, society rightfully labels him a deadbeat. But if a woman leaves her family because she's bored, society writes articles about how she is bravely finding herself.
This glaring hypocrisy raises a vital systemic question, and it transitions us beautifully into the arguments presented in the third section of the book, Institutional Capture.
Yes.
Because if underlying biology and the mechanics of the legal system are working in seamless tandem to extract resources from men, someone or something has to be orchestrating the culture that normalizes and celebrates this extraction.
It's not happening in a vacuum.
Right. Riker places the blame squarely and unapologetically on the systemic infiltration of feminism and Marxism into modern Western institutions.
He calls this overarching system the gynocracy. And the foundation of the gynocracy starts with the concept of the state systematically acting as a surrogate husband.
The state as a husband.
Riker points out that since the cultural revolutions of the 1970s, the U.S. government has massively expanded its welfare initiatives, specifically targeted at women with children, into a sprawling $170 billion a year industry.
The author's thesis here is that the modern welfare state was designed to actively replace the fundamental need for fathers in the home. He argues that by providing guaranteed public housing, food subsidies, health care, and direct financial stipends to single mothers, the government purposely disincentivizes women from relying on male partners or putting in the hard work required to maintain a difficult marriage.
So the state competes with men.
Exactly. The logic he presents is coldly rational. Why would a woman compromise with a flawed human husband when the federal government acts as a perfectly compliant provider?
Right.
A provider that never argues back, never demands physical intimacy, never asks for a warm meal, and most importantly, never stops depositing the check.
He shares a very brief but chilling story of an interaction he had with a single mother at a gas station. He asked her about her situation, and she told him flat out, without an ounce of shame, "I don't need no man. The government takes care of me."
Unbelievable.
He notes she was pulling in the equivalent of $32,000 annually in various state and federal benefits without working a single hour. Riker says this isn't female independence. It's a state-supported, taxpayer-funded separation from the realities of working life, and the cruelest irony is that it is primarily funded by the tax dollars of the very men who are being rendered socially obsolete by the system.
To illustrate just how deep and pervasive this institutional capture really is, Riker takes the reader on a fascinating international tour. He specifically looks at Scandinavian countries, like Sweden and Norway, which are constantly lauded by the mainstream media as progressive utopias of gender equality.
The progressive utopias.
He refers to them not as models to emulate, but as dark cautionary tales of the gynocracy taken to its logical extreme.
Yeah, he completely dismantles the progressive utopia narrative. Let's look at what he says about Norway. He talks extensively about the 2003 Norwegian law that legally mandated that 40% of all corporate board seats must go to women.
Right, the gender quotas.
Riker argues this mandate had absolutely nothing to do with corporate merit, business acumen, or market efficiency, and everything to do with enforcing a rigid Marxist ideology of equal outcomes.
He cites several economic studies showing that immediately following this government mandate, Norwegian firms suffered a measurable drop in overall market value and operating performance. He claims the corporate boards were hastily filled with political consultants, academics, and diversity activists who had zero actual experience running complex profit and loss statements for massive companies.
He calls it the feminist factory.
The feminist factory, yes. It's a system where useless diversity managers and bloated HR departments multiply like a virus, existing solely to install unqualified women as corporate trophies, effectively punishing male competence, driving away top talent, and creating massive systemic economic bloat.
And when he looks at Sweden, the social outcome he describes is incredibly dark. Riker points out an absolutely tragic statistic. While Sweden constantly celebrates its feminist government and its equitable social policies, the suicide rate for divorced men in Sweden is 3 times higher than that of married men.
3 times higher.
He tells the heartbreaking story of a man named Jonas in Malmö. Jonas lost 70% of his income in a brutal divorce, only to find out years later through a DNA test that the child he was paying for wasn't even his. Yet the progressive Swedish court still forcefully mandated that he continue paying child support to the mother.
What Riker is highlighting with these international examples is that in a political system that legally elevates female autonomy and comfort above all other societal metrics, male disposability becomes fully institutionalized.
It's just accepted.
It becomes the background radiation of the culture. And he argues that this conditioning doesn't just spontaneously happen in adult courtrooms or corporate boardrooms. It starts much, much earlier and is reinforced constantly by the media we consume.
Let's talk about what he calls Hollywood's systematic war on men. Riker says that if you look at the writers' rooms of major studios today, they are heavily dominated by women and progressive activists who have absolutely no biological or cultural interest in male survival or male heroism.
They're rewriting the myths.
He says they are actively rewriting the cultural narrative to erase masculinity. He points to Disney as prime suspect number 1. In the massive hit Frozen, the father, King Agnar, dies silently in a shipwreck early on, his legacy completely erased and forgotten, while the women become these omnipotent goddess queens who rule the kingdom perfectly without any need for husbands or male guidance.
He also points a critical finger at the modern Star Wars franchise. He argues that legacy male heroes, icons of traditional masculinity and heroism like Luke Skywalker and Han Solo, are systematically humiliated, killed off unceremoniously, or portrayed as bitter, cynical failures.
Right.
And who replaces them? Female protagonists like Rey, who, the author notes, possess instant godlike mastery of their skills without ever having to go through the traditional, painful hero's journey of grueling training, significant failure, and eventual redemption.
They just show up perfect.
Exactly. He even brings up massive television hits like Shonda Rhimes' Grey's Anatomy, arguing that in these gynocentric shows, male characters exist primarily to suffer, to cheat, to be emotionally stunted, or to die simply to serve as a catalyst for the emotional growth and ultimate triumph of the female leads.
The overriding message, according to Riker's analysis of pop culture, is that men are inherently useless unless they are actively serving or sacrificing themselves for women, and that the era of the male legacy is permanently over. But he says it's not just movies and TV shows programming us. The real conditioning, the most dangerous part of the trap, starts in the elementary school classroom.
The education enfeeblement.
He dedicates a deeply unsettling section to what he calls the education enfeeblement, arguing that modern public schools genuinely structurally hate boys.
He argues that the modern classroom environment has been transformed into a behavioral prison, specifically designed for the comfort and development of girls. The required behaviors, sitting perfectly still for 8 hours a day, whispering, avoiding any roughhousing or physical conflict, being highly compliant, these are traits that naturally align much more easily with female biological development.
While boys are wired differently.
Boys are biologically wired by testosterone for constant movement, physical competition, and risk-taking. But in the modern school, these natural male traits are immediately pathologized and labeled as disruptive or toxic.
He backs this up with some terrifying medical data. He notes that young boys are diagnosed with ADHD and subsequently drugged with powerful amphetamines like Adderall at triple the rate of young girls.
Triple the rate.
He shares the absolutely absurd story of a 7-year-old boy named Ethan in Massachusetts. Little Ethan was suspended and sent for mandatory behavioral intervention and psychological counseling because he chewed a strawberry Pop-Tart into the vague shape of a gun during recess.
A Pop-Tart.
Meanwhile, Riker sharply points out The devastating relational aggression, the vicious rumor mongering, and the psychological social manipulation that young girls naturally engage in are completely ignored or downplayed by teachers because, as he puts it, emotional violence doesn't count if it comes in pink.
If we pause and connect this sweeping cultural critique to your daily life, the author is asking you to observe how this seamless web of conditioning operates from early childhood straight through to adulthood. Think about the progression he lays out. Boys are medically drugged for simply acting like boys. Teenagers are constantly taught in university sociology classes that their innate masculinity is a toxic social construct that needs to be dismantled.
Mainstream media portrays fathers as bumbling idiots.
Bumbling, incompetent idiots who need their wives to save them. And corporate HR departments view any display of male assertiveness or negotiation as a hostile threat. How does this systemic cradle-to-grave messaging train men to silently, willingly accept their own disposability when they eventually face the absolute meat grinder of the family court system?
It is a terrifying claustrophobic progression when you lay it all out like that. And it brings us to the next major phase of the trap. Because before a man even gets to the horrors of family court, he has to actually navigate the modern dating scene, which Riker says is completely algorithmically rigged against the average guy.
Riker argues that the advent of modern dating apps hasn't just changed how we meet, it has fundamentally altered human mating dynamics on an evolutionary scale. He describes these apps, Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, as hypergamy accelerators.
Hypergamy accelerators.
Now, listeners are likely familiar with the concept of hypergamy, the evolutionary instinct for women to seek out mates of higher social status, physical stature, or resources than themselves.
Right, guys listening to this know what hypergamy is, but what's fascinating is how the author argues that the smartphone has poured gasoline on an ancient fire.
Exactly. The data he pulls directly from Hinge's own published transparency reports is brutal, and it confirms the worst fears of the manosphere. According to the data, a staggering 85% of all female likes and matches go to the top 20% of men on the app.
The top 20%.
We're talking about the guys with the six-pack abs, the guys standing on yachts, the ones displaying overt luxury lifestyles. The bottom 80% of average, hard-working, regular men are literally algorithmically erased. They don't even show up in the swiping queue. They are ghosts in the machine.
Riker posits that dating apps didn't create female hypergamy. They weaponized it by removing the limitations of geography and social circles. A woman sitting on her couch can now visually scan, judge, and ruthlessly discard hundreds of men in a matter of minutes.
It's ruthless efficiency.
He argues that the algorithm inherently rewards narcissism, sociopathy, and overt displays of wealth, while completely ignoring traits like loyalty, stability, and a nurturing disposition. Consequently, the men who would actually make the best fathers and the most reliable long-term providers are entirely ignored by the digital marketplace, while the top 20% of men essentially operate as a revolving door of short-term hookups.
But let's follow the author's logic further. Let's say an average guy does manage to navigate this digital minefield. He beats the algorithm, he gets into a serious relationship, or he gets married. Riker says this man immediately falls into an even more insidious psychological snare, the vulnerability trap. He calls this the ultimate male double bind.
This section of the book is perhaps one of his most incisive, cutting psychological critiques. He takes direct aim at the modern pop psychology movement, the kind of stuff popularized by figures like Brené Brown, which constantly preaches that emotional vulnerability is the ultimate form of courage.
You hear it constantly.
You hear it everywhere. Women claim they want sensitive, emotionally expressive men who are in touch with their feelings. But Riker argues this is a profound, incredibly dangerous deception.
He says that when women say they want vulnerability, they're actually demanding an emotional performance, not actual emotional depth or weakness. They want a man who acts appropriately moved when she needs validation, or who can cry at a romantic movie.
But if he actually needs help?
The very moment the man has genuine, crippling emotional needs of his own, or shows actual unfiltered weakness or fear, her ancient biological programming violently kicks in. She instantly ceases to see him as a protector and begins to perceive him as a direct threat to her security and the security of her potential offspring.
The author shares a devastating, real-world story to drive this home. He talks about a highly successful structural engineer named Kevin. Kevin was under immense pressure at work and suffered a severe panic attack. Looking for support, he confessed to his wife that he was struggling deeply with anxiety and a bout of depression.
He was being vulnerable.
He even explicitly stated to her, "I just need you to know I'm not weak, I'm just having a hard time right now." Her response, according to the book, she looked at him coldly and said, "I need a strong man."
Brutal.
She completely withdrew affectionately and filed for a no-fault divorce exactly 48 hours later, ultimately walking away with 78% of the marital assets they had built together.
Riker uses Kevin's story to formulate a harsh rule for his readers. In the gynocentric system, a man's confession is never met with catharsis. It is treated as capitulation. He brings up a documented UK custody case that is truly hard to believe.
The crying father case.
During a highly contentious hearing, a father broke down and cried on the stand out of sheer frustration and love for his children. The presiding judge literally denied him access to his kids, citing his tears as evidence that he was emotionally unstable and unfit to parent.
Just because he cried.
Meanwhile, the mother, who had documented proven incidents of alcohol abuse on her record, was awarded full custody and deemed resilient by that same judge. Tears determination, Riker calls it.
To really hammer this double bind home, he contrasts this theory by looking at how public figures are treated when they face adversity. He points to Mark Zuckerberg's famous congressional testimony regarding Facebook. Zuckerberg sat there for hours, stone-faced, practically robotic, showing absolutely zero emotion, completely stoic under massive fire.
Right.
The press and the internet mocked him endlessly for acting like an android, but the result? He maintained his absolute power, his wealth, and his company. Then, Riker points to Adam Neumann, the flamboyant founder of WeWork.
Completely different approach.
When his company started crashing, Neumann embraced modern vulnerability. He openly sobbed in meetings, he ranted emotionally, he shared his deepest fears with his board. The result? He was ruthlessly laughed out of the room, stripped of his CEO title, and lost his empire.
The takeaway the author is explicitly spelling out for the listener here is stark. Riker says that in the real world, real men are never, ever rewarded for crying or showing weakness. They're invariably demoted, divorced, and disowned. He says, you are put in an impossible paradigm. You are damned if you are strong and stoic, then society labels you toxic and emotionally unavailable. And you are damned if you are soft and vulnerable, then biology dictates you are weak and you are discarded.
Because the game is so thoroughly rigged, from the algorithmic erasure on the dating apps to the vulnerability trap in the bedroom, right down to the financial execution in the family courts, men are waking up. They are realizing they simply cannot win by playing by the old honorable rules their grandfathers played by.
The rules have changed.
And that realization brings us to the explosive climax of the book, the final chapters where Riker shifts from diagnosing the disease to prescribing the cure. It's time to discuss the Red Pill Rebellion, strategy, brotherhood, and opting out.
This is where the tone of the book changes dramatically. The final chapters are not philosophical. They read like a highly tactical underground field manual. His message to his readers is blunt and uncompromising. Stop complaining on the internet. Stop crying about how unfair the system is, and start aggressively organizing.
He starts with the most immediate battlefield, the courtroom. Riker argues that since the legal system operates entirely on cold, hard evidence, rather than any concept of fairness or truth, men must become absolute masters of documentation. Your word means nothing. Your data means everything.
He details some incredibly innovative, almost dystopian strategies for surviving the modern family court. He talks extensively about an app called Proof of Fatherhood, which he says was built by a group of frustrated tech engineers in Austin, Texas.
An app specifically for this.
Yes. This app is designed to create an unbreakable digital alibi for fathers. It automatically logs GPS check-ins every time the father drops the kids at school or takes them to the doctor. It scans and categorizes receipts for every single child-related expense down to a pack of diapers, and it instantly syncs all of this data to an encrypted cloud storage server that the mother cannot access or alter.
That is next-level preparation.
The strategy is simple. When a mother inevitably stands before a judge and claims the father is absent or not contributing, the father doesn't argue. He just drops a massive file of irrefutable, time-stamped, geolocated data on the judge's desk, effectively neutralizing her narrative.
But he also highlights brilliant, low-tech solutions. He talks about the absolute necessity of using color-coded Google calendars shared between parents, where every single interaction, swap, and request is documented in writing. He emphasizes, with bold text, the absolute necessity of never ever signing a default legal agreement just to make the pain stop.
Never surrender.
Riker tells men to start treating co-parenting and divorce as a heartbreaking emotional tragedy, and to start treating it exactly like a hostile corporate merger that requires meticulous, unfeeling project management.
But the real power of this rebellion, according to Riker, doesn't come from apps or calendars. It comes from a return to tribalism. It comes from brotherhood. He shares incredible, inspiring stories of men who have decided to pool their resources to fight back collectively. He introduces us to Joe in Detroit.
Joe the mechanic.
Joe is a blue-collar mechanic who went through a brutal divorce. Instead of giving up, he turned his commercial garage into a literal legal fortress for local fathers. On weekends, Joe hosts seminars where he brings in retired, sympathetic ex-judges, forensic accountants, and aggressive paralegals to teach working-class fathers exactly how to file motions and fight for custody without going bankrupt.
That's amazing.
According to the book, within a single year of starting this garage clinic, 14 men in his local network successfully regained visitation rights they had previously lost.
That is incredible. And he talks about the Divorce Defense Circle in Columbus, Ohio. This was a group of a warehouse supervisor who organized 6 different men who were all facing custody battles in the same county. They realized they were being bled dry individually, so they pooled their money. They essentially created a strike fund.
A legal strike fund.
They used the pooled money to hire top-tier expert witnesses that none of them could afford alone. They coordinated their public testimony, shared legal research, and successfully exposed a highly biased local judge, ultimately forcing a massive change in the local legal culture. They unionized against the family court.
We also see the rise of proactive legal strategies among younger men, like the prenup pact. This is a growing trend where groups of close friends sign legally binding mutual agreements to financially fund each other's legal defense if one of them ever gets divorced. It acts as a private brotherhood insurance policy that actually works, unlike the traditional state prenups that get tossed out.
And the brother oath.
Yes. He also talks about the brother oath, which is a formal, almost sacred pledge taken among men to never abandon a divorced brother, meaning they pledge to offer him a place to live, financial loans, and emotional support when the state strips him of his assets.
Riker even notes the rapid rise of red pill barbershops popping up in dozens of major cities. These aren't just places to get a haircut. They are acting as underground, word-of-mouth legal clinics where working-class men can get reliable legal referrals, share tactics, and find support away from the prying eyes and listening ears of feminist-dominated institutions.
It's a shadow network.
What's so fascinating about this entire section is that Riker isn't proposing anything new. He is actively advocating for a return to ancient male bonding structures, labor unions, fraternal orders, tribal war councils, but repurposed specifically for legal and financial survival in the 21st century.
But for a massive, growing contingent of men, Riker admits that fighting the system in court is a losing battle, no matter how well organized you are. For them, he says, the ultimate, most devastating rebellion isn't fighting the system at all. It's starving it of oxygen. It's the exit strategy. It is opting out entirely.
This is where we get into the massive rise of the herbivore men, or the MGTOW movement, which stands for men going their own way. Now, mainstream media often paints these men as bitter, socially inept losers who live in their mother's basements because they can't get a date.
That's the popular narrative.
Riker insists that narrative is a desperate lie peddled by a system terrified of losing its tax base. He frames the MGTOW movement not as a retreat born of weakness, but as a highly calculated, deeply rational economic boycott.
The mathematical logic he presents for this boycott is bulletproof in its simplicity. He argues that when the statistical risk of losing 70% of your net worth, losing the home you pay for, and losing access to the children you love vastly outweighs the increasingly rare benefits of a modern marriage, the only logical, self-preserving choice for a rational actor is to flat out refuse to sign the contract.
Why play a rigged game?
Exactly. Why play a casino game where the house is legally mandated to cheat you?
He talks about real-world manifestations of this boycott, like the marriage delay pledge. According to his research, over 120,000 men in various online forums have taken a vow to absolutely refuse marriage before the age of 35.
They're waiting to build leverage.
They are intentionally waiting until they have acquired enough personal wealth, leverage, and emotional detachment to dictate the terms of any relationship, rather than being dictated to by a younger partner or the state. He also discusses the rise of stealth partnerships. These are men who are living with women, even raising kids with them, but who absolutely refuse to sign state cohabitation registries or formal marriage licenses, specifically to avoid falling into the legal trap of common law marriage or divorce court.
And for the high net worth individuals, the entrepreneurs, the surgeons, the guys with serious capital to protect Riker, explores highly sophisticated financial evasion tactics. He details how top-earning men are utilizing complex LLCs, offshore accounts, and impenetrable private trusts to hold all their assets and fund their children's expenses.
So they own nothing on paper.
They do this so that on paper, they own absolutely nothing. By legally removing their wealth from their personal name, they bypass the jurisdiction of the family courts entirely. If the relationship ends, there is nothing for the state to redistribute. By completely removing the state from the romantic relationship, these men maintain absolute leverage and permanently protect their life's work. Okay, let's take a breath and wrap this massive, intense journey up by summarizing what we've unpacked today. Conrad Riker's underlying thesis in Marriage Treadmill is razor sharp and deeply unsettling. He posits that modern institutions, from the elementary schools drugging boys to the HR departments punishing assertiveness, straight up to the family courts redistributing wealth, have been systematically captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies specifically designed to extract resources and labor from men while offering them nothing in return. That is his core argument.
According to the text, the only way a modern man can survive today with his sanity and his bank account intact is through unyielding, paranoid documentation, by building impenetrable offline male brotherhoods, and ultimately by flat out refusing to sign legally lopsided contracts like traditional state-sanctioned marriage.
It is a profoundly stark, unyielding, and cynical worldview. And as we conclude our impartial reporting on this highly controversial text, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative question that builds on the macroeconomic implications of Riker's work.
Lay it on us.
Consider the ultimate logical endpoint of this celibacy strike, or the MGTOW movement. What happens if this isn't just a fringe internet subculture? What happens if the highest earning, most hyper-capable men in our society, the master engineers, the trauma surgeons, the men who build the electrical grids and run the logistics networks, universally adopt this strategy?
That would be devastating.
If they collectively refuse to participate in marriage, refuse to buy the massive suburban homes that drive the real estate market, and refuse to build traditional consumer families, what happens to the underlying economic and social infrastructure of a Western nation that secretly relies entirely on the surplus labor, the high-income taxation, and the physical sacrifice of those very men to fund its sprawling $170 billion welfare states and progressive institutions?
Wow.
It is a chilling macroeconomic question that society seems entirely unprepared to answer.
It really makes you rethink the entire foundation of the societal structure we take for granted every day. Listen, this has been an absolutely incredible, mind-bending deep dive. If you found this breakdown valuable, and especially for the men tuning in who are trying to understand their rights and the shifting legal landscape they are operating in, you absolutely need to read the source material for yourself to see the raw data.
Definitely read it.
Do not take our word for it. Check Amazon, Kindle, and Google Playbooks right now to purchase Marriage Treadmill by Conrad Riker. And make sure you go online and follow Conrad Riker on Substack for his ongoing unfiltered strategies and updates on these exact issues.
Thank you for taking this long, intellectually demanding journey with us into some very challenging and uncomfortable terrain.
And please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the show before you close the app so we can keep bringing you these massive deep dives. Thank you for joining us today. Stay sharp, stay informed, and stay connected. Catch you next time.